as they talk about Christ and salvation and redemption, it's not these intellectual propositions that win me over or convert me or change me, but a kind of inevitable and successive current of the truth of his grace that leads to me standing in the water of the River Thames with Bear Grylls, survival expert, and my mate Joe, who I walk the path of recovery with. Joe's known hard times and jail times, beautiful friend of mine. Either side of me, dipping me backwards into the Thames, the sort of coughing and choking that kind of preceded it.
Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Welcome to the AC Podcast. My name is Andy Steiger, and I am joined today with Wesley Huff.
As always.
And special guest, Russell Brand. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It is really good to have you on the show.
I'm very grateful to be here with Wesley Huff's boss, the great sword enthusiast, Wesley Huff, a office full of armaments.
Yeah, the background of that is that I have a collection of swords, but since sort of my exposure has gotten bigger, people have been sending me swords, which I'm not saying no, but my wife is definitely worried about the storage of swords. So that's why I have an office, I guess.
Russell, man, it's so good to have you on the show. Ever since we saw you come to faith, Wes and I have been talking that we would love one day to have you on the show. So to have you on the show is a real privilege. I'm excited to talk to you today about your faith. Before we get into things, though, have you ever heard of apologetics before? Is that a new term to you? Are you familiar with it? And have you ever been on an apologetics podcast before? Is this the first one?
I've never been on an apologetics podcast before. I don't like the name apologetics because of its obvious connection with apology. Not that I'm adverse to apology as a person who believes deeply in restitution as a member of 12-step programs, but it's always struck me as a sort of an interesting position to start from. Look, sorry about the Crusades. Sorry about that. Sorry it doesn't fit in with your current cultural views. Sorry that it's not materialistic. Sorry that it's not individualistic. But I reckon probably at the root of this is my own personal misunderstanding of apologetics in that context.
Yeah. No, I think that's a common, we were doing some language sort of AI programming for a video we did recently, and in it Andy said, Wes and Andy here from Apologetics Canada, and when it translated it into French, it actually translated it into Wes and Andy here apologizing for being Canadian. So even AI can't fully understand what's going on. But yeah, so the word apologetics, just to give you sort of a brief background, Russell, is that it comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a reason or give a defense. And so in 1 Peter 3:15, Peter writes to the church and says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect." And that little prepositional phrase in Greek is pros apologia. And so historically, within Christianity, but not limited to Christianity, apologetics has been simple giving reasons for the worldview perspectives or the things that you hold. And so there's a long history. There are a group of early church Christians called apologists who wrote treatises to Rome on why they should not be murdered. So there's a long-standing history of apologetics. And so the naming of our organization has less to do with apologizing and saying sorry for the Crusades and more giving a defense for the Christian worldview in light of something like the Crusades.
It's interesting, though, the way that language evolves and morphs. For example, you may, like me, grow weary of pointing out that the word irony is a different word than coincidence, to the point where actually now you might as well accept that in many people's vocabulary, ironic means coincidence. That's how that's how they're using that word. Not that there is a sort of a poetic inversion available in circumstances, the way that sort of irony was intended to be used. And apologetics in this sort of post-structuralist, end of days, cast aside Christianity, yet let us cling to what we call cultural Christianity, that apologetics could be utilized and understood to mean, look, this is our position, although, of course, you're an expert and I fully accept your etymology and explanation, but it still sort of sounds like, in defense, and it makes sense that that's, given the persecution of early Christians and Christians to this day, that would be the sort of the starting point. That makes sense.
Well, and one of the things that we see in the Bible is this idea of, to give an answer or a reason, as Peter says, for the hope that we have in Jesus. And that's what we want to talk to you about today, is the reason why you have placed your hope in him. And I want to get into your story of faith, Russell, like how you came to faith. And I think maybe the best place to start, as we just kind of jump right into it, is if you would be willing to tell us about the worldview that you were brought up in. What was your family's worldview? Did you grow up in a Christian family, a non-Christian family? What did that look like?
I'm flattered that when you said at the beginning of our conversation that when I came to the Lord, or the Lord came to me, that you were interested to talk to me, I feel like for a moment, I feel sort of flattered. And then I wonder why it might be. And I feel like, how did you come to Christ? Only after I'd come to everything else. That's how. Only after I'd come to everything else did I come to Christ. Only after I tried drugs and addiction and approval and fame and prestige and privilege and money and indulgence and hedonism and Epicureanism and rationalism. After the false idols lay broken, a fallen temple of themselves, as I stood among the shards and ashes, there in the miasma, coagulating miraculously, was the crucifix. There he was. And oddly, what was required for that transubstantiation of the moment was this sort of brokenness of myself. Me and Wes chatted before. Wes, excuse me, I don't know that one likes that S softer. Me and Wes chatted before, and I came to Christ in crisis. I came to Christ in pain. I came to Christ in brokenness, and not because I didn't believe Christ was real, but somehow I weren't willing to be dislodged from the altar of the present myself. I wanted to sort of stay there somehow. I wanted it to still be about me. The idea that the goal of one's life is oneself, and even the idea that it is your life. Why would you think that it's your life? Where did you get that idea from, that it's your life? What I recognized is, and I reckon even the reason, if I can dare to even attempt to be objective about my literal, actual self, the reason that maybe my conversion is interesting is because I'm a person that has been given access to the promises of the cathedral of our culture. I do know what it's like, not only to be famous after you've grown up a fat little boy, not only what it's like to be famous, but to be that type of famous where it's miraculous access to the treasures of their false light kingdom. Here, try it. In fact, in my wilderness, instead of rebuking Christ 3 times, I'm like, yes, and yes, please, and how much, and would you mind doubling it? Here, throw yourself from the temple. Yeah, all right. Here, turn the stone into bread. Yeah, look at that. The things that were stone and inaccessible now are living and edible. Now you can be in command of all this. Yes, please. And that's how I finally found out that I wasn't Jesus, because I yield to temptation. I worship self. I find it very difficult to put the first last and the last first, i.e. to put me and my wants after the wants of people that can do nothing for me. I find these things hard and difficult. As for the biography, I come from a drizzly, grisly, grey place so ludicrous that it actually named itself after what it was. Grays is the name of it. If you're American and can't conceive of such a place, or Canadian, guilty as charged, maybe AI had a point. Here are Andy and Wes apologizing for their Canadianness. Well, someone should apologize. I come from a place that's sort of a banal and bland, spilled suburban wasteland of low expectations, but also curiously glamorous and vivid, where working class people made good celebrate the treasures of the culture with their white teeth and their tanned skin and their reality TV shows that are somewhat like Jersey Shore in the United States of America. I grew up without a religion, like, as far as I can tell, most English people. There are 70 million people in the UK, 1 million of them are Christian. In the United States, I think it's like 330 million, and 100 million of them are Christian. And that's what it feels like in England. It feels and as if the resurrection of were the most tedious thing imaginable. No glory, no mystery, no celebration, no baptism, no reading, no education. Only for me, my childhood, single mom, only child. I mean, yeah, like there was no religious and the kind of spiritual component was somewhat based on scarcity and survival before that baton was handed to addiction.
When you were growing up as a kid in a single parent family, what was kind of your worldview? Did you see life as having meaning, no meaning? Did you think God existed? You know, what was the worldview you were operating from? Or were you just saying it's just a purely individualistic worldview that just flourished from there?
Like most, or as far as I can understand, schools from the cultural group that I'm from, if you are not good at football or fighting or the other word that begins with F, you might as well forget it. And I was told that redemption and salvation comes through success. That you better make something of your life. The best that you're going to get is you might become economically successful or you might become famous. And then by some sort of extraordinary set of circumstances, I indeed did.
You know what I find interesting about that, Russell, is that you have experienced a lot of things that people wish to experience, and yet you were there. And you actually kind of reached that pinnacle of, like, as you described, the cathedral of carnality. And so, and as you were articulating that, I couldn't help but think, I don't know if you've read St. Augustine's Confessions, but he has this great line where he says, our hearts are restless until we rest in you. And just how much, when you were describing that, the testament that a life that not only seeks the things that you sought, but actually got a lot of them, if not all of them, actually comes, when we come to the end of ourselves is when God, starts the beginning of our story. So, I really think it's interesting that you, in one way, kind of stand in what a lot of people are striving for.
In a way, celebrity is just an amplification of something that can be topically or locally achieved. And the Augustine quote that you refer to, Wes, is similar, isn't it, to that psalm, like the brook panteth, like the hunted hart panteth after the brook, we panteth after thee. And this little bit of scripture is used in an exchange between Bill W., one of the founders of the prominent and dominant 12-step group Alcoholics Anonymous, and Carl Jung. Because the origin story of the 12 steps involves, in a sense, that aperture that opens when psychiatry, the profession of psychiatry, starts to lay claim to territory that previously would belong to theology and the church, creating, I suppose, among many other things, wellness, fortifying the new palaces of individualism that are being erected. So anyway, I mention this only in a roundabout way as to say that much of what I have experienced as a celebrity is merely, I believe, an amplification of what anyone who struggled with addiction would have experienced. Like that, it's the addiction that's the defining quality, not the celebrity. The celebrity is sort of an anomaly and makes me something of an outlier. But what I believe is, not what I believe, what is believed to be at the root of addiction is a deep spiritual yearning. And addiction is, in a sense, just an amplification of attachment and our materialism and consuming and false idols. So what I feel like is appetite, craving, yearning, will to power, longing, whatever restlessness, however you want to describe this condition. What does the wanting want? What does the wanting want? And what is the bread that can fulfill you and sustain you? What is the light that can illuminate this unknowable darkness? What is the vine to which I need to be attached? And what is the way that I must walk? The problem pre-coming to Christ was, even though I was I believed in God, even though I knew that selfishness was wrong and self-centeredness was wrong, there was still enough kind of pagan Epicureanism sanctioned in the culture to legitimize ongoing self-reverence. Somehow when his body breaks, like it was somehow that broke me. It broke like it didn't. Up until then, somehow I felt like I don't want just some other man or even man God in me. Like that seems like a kind of move of the government. I couldn't receive as an act of compassion, as an act of supreme sacrifice, as the creating of a new covenant. How could I see that? I didn't know enough. I hadn't experienced enough. I didn't know enough brokenness. But with St. Paul so much, probably like a lot of early Christians or new Christians, I guess, is because in him he's just a guy, like, albeit an incredibly high achieving one. He's just a guy that was really committed to what he was doing before and then got right on and was committed. Like, live like it's real. It's real. Live like it's real. Live like it's real.
I want to continue in your story, but I want to just take a moment for a detour because there's an interesting part of your story, Russell, where I noticed that you were one of those outliers that spoke out against pornography early on. Oh. And I thought that was very interesting, but I'm wondering, it's interesting that you had that view where you were against pornography, but was this before you were a Christian? Like, help me on that timeline. It's like, it seems to me that you knew some things were wrong, but yet Christ hadn't fully grabbed a hold of your heart yet.
Oh, no, yeah, that was, I suppose, it's certainly inchoate Christ, at least from my subjective experience. No, the way that I came to know that pornography was wrong is very unique and biographical, but I've already alluded to it. Unattractive, but appetite-oriented youngster and pubescent, suddenly, like, I changed a lot in adolescence anyway. I became sort of more confident, more attractive, taller. I changed. I found something I was good at, performance, and I went from the sort of solitary, onanistic 1970s, or 1980s, 90s obsession with pornography to suddenly getting unbelievable access to promiscuous sex, like sort of I don't reckon it can be that common to have known what it was like to feel that worthless and to feel that disembodied and ugly in the body, and then to feel suddenly ultra attractive, that sex is coming towards you. Sex that was like trying to find, was needle in a haystack, gnat in a strainer, impossible to find. Suddenly sex is everywhere. Like, it is so extraordinary. And until people have experienced it, they should be careful about judging it, because it's, I know there are a lot of men that are strong enough and like they're super famous and maybe they're married or whatever. But I also know, because I've lived in this world, that a lot of men suddenly granted to that kind of sexual access do not do well with that power. And there's a reason that sex is sacred. So like the pornography, I knew what pornography did, because I knew how like, even comedically, the metaphors I was using for pornography and what I understood because of the framework that addiction and recovery, abstinence-based recovery, addiction recovery gives you, is that I remember just speaking about porn, and I remember the feeling. I remember finding pornography as a boy and just thinking that it was sacred. Like, oh, look at this. This is powerful. I want this. I want to be on my own with this thing. This is incredible. And then sort of, it's so strange, addiction to pornography. I don't look at pornography. I can't look at pornography. I won't look at pornography. I don't look at pornography. Haven't done for years. But even if you abstain from pornography for a period of time and then go back and look at it, you're like, why did I not do this all the time? This is amazing. This is brilliant. Look at this. Oh my God, how I can see all of the arguments of the hedonists. It's exciting. It's stimulating. It's defibrillating energy on low frequencies. I get the argument for it. It's extremely exciting. But it's not only profane, it's sacralizing the profane and making profane the sacred. It's diabolical. It's literally diabolical. And attempts to sort of reposition it from sort of feminist perspectives or entrepreneurial perspectives or any kind of commodified, sanitized version of it is appalling. So I knew it as an addict. I knew that if you are an addict, because addiction is the only thing really I'm qualified to speak about with, not with authority, but the authority that comes from experience, at least, personal authority. Like, I know that whether it's drugs or alcohol or pornography or sex or chocolate or status, if you are looking for God, you can never have enough of what you don't really want. You can never have enough of what you don't really want. Some people might be able to drink and take drugs and maybe even look at pornography, do heroin, go to orgies, I don't know. But if what you were actually looking for was God, then you, must find the path of the saints.
It's interesting. It's one of those things where you can feast and feast, but you're never full. And that is one aspect of pornography that is, as you say, diabolical in that it can dehumanize you. But the other aspect, of course, is where you objectify others and you go down this process where you dehumanize others, and now you can't really see other people. And I think that's one of the truly diabolical aspects of dehumanization and just sin and evil in general. Andy,
yes, because we were discussing, Wes and I, previously, that now we live in a culture where it's quite possible, likely, in fact, this is a rather direct example, that you could attend an exercise class, be told that that person has an OnlyFans site, and it's almost just like a loose synecdoche for they're on the internet, Instagram. But no, it's that you can now go and for exchange of money engage in the most intimate acts, at least in 2 dimensions, with that person conceivable. If I'd have been granted that's fentanyl to heroin compared to the kind of pornography that I was exposed to. And what it does is it not only commodifies sex, it sanitizes that commodification to the point where it's absolutely normal, where you might forget that sex was ever supposed to be sacred, that there was ever supposed to be something sacred about it. How can you not? If you're a person that's having those kind of experiences, know that someone you've seen when you're dropping off at the school gate, or that you've spoken to them in a bakery or in the street, that you can go and pay money and analyze them in the same way that a medical professional might. Like, how can that not affect the way you look at everybody? I mean, I remember what it used to do to me looking at pornography, but remember, I didn't really need to look at pornography very much because I was granted that extraordinary access to promiscuous sex. But what it does is it makes it sort of permissible. That's a strong frequency, sexual desire. Materially, it's the currency upon which matter is generated. So if you engage that as if it's sacred and ignore that there is an ulterior or at least distinct frequency that we call sacred, deny that, then it is a God. Then it is a God. It's as powerful as a God. I think it's an extraordinarily dangerous power precisely because, as you described, I once heard an English cleric say pornography is bad not because it shows us too much, but because it shows us too little.
Yeah, and I think it creates these unrealistic expectations, which I'm sure you can testify to in terms of, I heard it once said that pornography is the highlight reel of, say, like a soccer, a football game, where you're just constantly seeing the moves and the goals and it can actually desensitize you to just the regular rhythm of what sex is actually meant to be, and that it's 2 people who are living together in a reality, and it skews it in a true bastardization of what sex is supposed to be.
I mean, I don't know if my experience is everyone's, but my assumption is that a significant number of men watching this will have had their first encounters with sex through pornography and would have significant and defining encounters with sex through pornography. And that being normalized and commodified and monetized to the degree that it has been will likely mean that we don't even have a reference for sanctified eroticism within the sacred bond of marriage, for example. I mean, that seems like an extraordinarily esoteric idea. You might as well be describing some rare and particular toucan, some bird of paradise, scarce glimpse, because the culture is normalizing, absolutely normalizing objectification. Firstly, in the ways that we've discussed through online pornography and online sort of sex hookups or whatever, Tinder, Grindr, whatever. And then through the pervasiveness of the amplification of sexual imagery used to sell everything from yogurt to an automobile.
Man, I tell you, Russell, we could just continue to explore this topic alone. There's so much to be said on it, and I want to jump back into your story now, and I just want to ask you. You know, oftentimes when people are in addiction, they never try to get out of it or think of what's an alternative until they hit rock bottom. What was, you know, did you have a rock bottom moment? Was there a moment where you came to the end of yourself and that you now, you know, like what was it that led you to Jesus is what I'm asking.
Oh, well, that's different from drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol, I've been clean and sober for 22 years. So I'm schooled and a veteran in that particular aspect of abstinence. What's been fascinating is to see how the journey from 12-step recovery into Christianity is a very sort of straightforward one. It's interesting that to me that the 12 steps are both an expression of Christianity, but also somehow I wouldn't say completely secularized, but pragmatized tool to access Christianity. It seems to me obvious now that if you continue to look at 12-step recovery, you would recognize that Christ is there, undergirding it and illuminating it, both transcendent and immanent within it is Christ. As for rock bottoms in the most general sense likely means that you are experiencing shame to the degree where suicide or change are your likely next moves. That's what I mean by rock bottom. And what I mean by the spiritual life is suicide prevention. I don't mean optimization. I don't mean become better at your job or save your marriage or become better. I mean, so you don't kill yourself, you might want to consider this alternative reality that's being denied to you. So you don't kill yourself. Because if you need God the way I need God, things are going to get so dark for you, so dark. Because people are going to tell you that the solution is some form of excellence and that through merit you might achieve some kind of personal salvation. And whether it's through framing romance in the same way that one might sensibly enshrine Christ as the one, as the Saviour, as the one true God. If you go traipsing through our culture in search of solutions, it's going to be a long, long while in the wilderness for you. So my first encounter, like a little boy, like so many times, again and again and again, I'm shown this is not going to be enough. Your family life is not going to save you. Drugs are not going to save you. Chocolate biscuits are not going to save you. Sex is not going to save you. None of these things are going to save you. Nothing can take what you have. Nothing can take the amount of devotion that you have to give. Get in the throne room, hurl yourself at the foot of the cross now and gorge yourself. The transubstantiation, for me, it can't be just a wafer and a sip, although sometimes actively that's what it is. I need the flesh and I need the blood. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's a lot of people wandering through this world remote, broken, lost, on the edge of suicide, self-harming, filling themselves up with bad food, bad ideas, bad pharma, bad films, bad relationships that need to come to him now, need to find him now in this moment. And there are so many obstacles put before him because if people were able to see him vividly in the present moment, illuminated as blessedly I see his face now, the world will change significantly. It would be what I figure if I was trying to create Luciferian globalist power, what I would want is a population of disillusioned, self-centered people that are eating bad food and objectifying one another, that were disassociated and believed that their sole duty was self-salvation. That would be a pretty perfect precondition for Luciferianism.
Man, one question for you, by the way. Did you come across Wes and Apologetics Canada through the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting through that podcast, and actually before that podcast, we here at AC had many people come to faith. Many. This last year, we had seen more people come to faith than ever before. And then after that Joe Rogan podcast, we just had a flood of emails of people that had come to faith. And I want to read one to you that I'm curious. This is an apologetics podcast. This is your first apologetics podcast. And maybe you could participate in a little bit of apologetics here, of giving a reason. But I want to share with you this note that was sent in from a lady, and see how you would respond to her. I think you've already kind of responded at some level, but I'd like to know what you would specifically say to her. She said this in response to the podcast. She says, "I just want to let you know that Wes has changed my life. I caught him on a podcast with Billy." And by the way, we would say Jesus changed your life, or maybe Wes is putting her on the right track, let's say. "I caught him on a podcast with Billy, watched him on the Joe and PBD podcast. His PBD interview brought me to tears, and here I am now. I was brought up without religion, and in my late 30s, I felt lost. Went on a spiritual journey, and boy, let's say the Billy Carsons of the world needed Wes to come and save us. I'm 43 now, and I could not be happier that chapter of searching and coming across Billy is over now. I just want to let you know that he has left a profound impact on me and my family, and that I want to thank him. I'm not sold," and here's what I want you to respond to. She says, "I'm not sold on submitting to Jesus just yet, but I am sold on God, and that he has been with me and within me my whole life. As I go down the path of learning about the possibility of accepting Jesus now, I hope following your new Can I Trust the Bible series brings me closer to that. Thank you, Christina."
Hey listeners, I hope you've been enjoying the podcast so far. Before we get back to it, I wanted to let you know about an amazing event that we got coming up really, really soon. The Apologetics Canada Conference. This year's title is called The Theology of Technology, and we'll be holding it March 7th and 8th at Northview Community Church in Abbotsford, BC, Canada. From eyeglasses to smartphones, technology is all around us. It always has been. In fact, it's difficult to imagine humanity without it. However, recent advancements, especially in artificial intelligence, otherwise known as AI, have connected us to technology in profound ways. With technology that can even mimic humanity, we as followers of Christ must consider what technology is and what role it ought to play in our increasingly digital lives. So join us March 7th and 8th for our next Apologetics Canada Conference as we explore a biblical theology of technology. We're going to have some exciting speakers such as Wesley Huff, Bruce Lawn from King's Dream Entertainment, and many, many more. So make sure you head to apologeticscanada.com/conference25-BC right there as soon as this episode is done, and make sure you register. We can't wait to see you there in person or online. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I'm glad you've asked me to respond to that, because the purgatorial space that Christina is currently occupying is a world that I know well. I believe that there is more. When C.S. Lewis says, "Those of us that have glimpsed behind the veil, that know there's something else, are consumed by a kind of lust for the truth about God. And like bodily lust, it has the strange quality of making all else seem secondary while we're in its grasps." Looking back, I know that when I was young, I encountered the divine. I saw it as a somewhat diffuse and perhaps pantheistic force. There is a God, and somehow that God is tethered to morality and conduct. And if you think of the various ways that the word conduct might be used, perhaps that's significant. But it seems to me that when I didn't voluntarily surrender to Christ, through cataclysm and crisis, I was shown that my current resources were insufficient for the job at hand, i.e. stay alive, survive, live in this world. It'd been enough for me to kind of believe that, there's some sort of universal spirit and people love one another, and I really like Rumi, and I like Buddha, and I like all of these various things, and I even like, folklore and crystals and, hey, crystal meth on a bad day. But like what changed for me is there was something absolute in Christ, something absolute and necessary in the the combination of the incarnation, in the combination of carnality and the divine, some new frequency was achieved. And through the death and resurrection and the endowment of the Holy Spirit, a new experience become available. Most significant of all that, I reckon, is that up until the point, while in the purgatory, it's still me. It's still me. Until it's Jesus, it's me. And I know it cannot be me because it's too easy for Satan to get me. Really easy. Through desire, through fear, through distraction. I'm vulnerable. But Jesus Christ is not vulnerable. He has endured. He has prevailed. It is finished. So, and also may I say, I suppose, if there's a bit of scripture that helps me with this, it's the peace that passeth all understanding. In our land and language of hyperbole and great claims, it would be easy to think of the peace that passeth all understanding as like a really, really big chunk of peace. But for me, the peace that passeth all understanding is where my understander stops, my rationalism, my reason, my enlightenment and values. There is a peace that follows after that. When I let go of the idea that I can't understand it, I can't understand how God comes to earth as a little baby, lives a life, keeps himself to himself more or less till he's 30, goes on a mission, then challenges authority in some pretty explicit and articulate ways, performs miracles, predicts his own death, sacrifice, rises again. I can't, like, in the same mind that understands how I use my phone or why I should be at the center of my life. I can't, using that equipment, understand such a proposition. But when I believe, I receive. When I believe it, when I go, oh, I know it's true, I know it's true. It's really interesting paradox, the believe, receive. But it's absolutely necessary to make that step.
I really appreciate that kind of breaking down of that, especially the admittance that you were in a very similar place to someone like Christina. When I was working in the Middle Eastern country of Jordan, I was working by the Dead Sea. And one of the things that really struck me about the Dead Sea, and then reading scripture and talking about having a cup that overflows, is the idea which it just came to my mind when you were talking of the Jordan River feeds into both the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, and yet, or the Sea of Galilee rather, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, and yet one holds on to all the sediment and it ends up killing it. And the other has the ability for it to flow out and give. And that's not coming from either of those bodies of water. It's flowing in, but it's really the one that acknowledges where the source of the life is and then allows that to go out that creates the true life. And so I think one of the things I'm always encouraged with, and I think, Russell, this is a testament to who you are as well, is that the disciples, when Jesus is discipling them, they never really seem to get it. And yet they're not Jesus' disciples, right? They're the disciples. Like, who do you say that I am? Well, this guy says you're this, and that guy says, and he's like, no, who do you say that I am? And I think when we're looking at, a Russell from, years ago, or a Christina, especially hearing you say that and kind of put yourself in the place of this proverbial purgatory, as you put it, is that a lot of us are like the disciples, where we're on the edge. And we need to step over and come to that reality that, like you said, and I think you put it really well, until we realize that it's all about Jesus, it's still going to some degree be all about us. And if it's all about us, it can't be all about Jesus.
So for you, Russell, when did it become about Jesus? And I'm talking like specifically, how did you hear about Jesus, or when did I know you said through the 10 steps you found, I know they often talk about God in the 10 steps, of course, but like, what about like Jesus? Like, who introduced you to Jesus?
Well, in a way, Jesus needs no prior introduction. I mean, Jesus as a sort of a figure in the culture is very, very present, even if you live in a secularized sort of, gosh, what do you call Britain? Sort of a collapsed empire trying to revivify itself with the sort of the offal and entrails of collapsing, imploding globalism. Even there, you've got churches, even there, you've got people talking about Jesus, but it's, as I say, kind of banalized. And because I was a kid that was doing things like taking hallucinogens, I was sort of aware of this sort of psychedelic Christ. And indeed, it's almost this somewhat psychedelic Christ to whom I've been reintroduced when I think of this collapsing wave particle Christ, this immanent, transcendent Christ. Like there's things in there that are impossible for me to hold in my mind. And if I could hold them in my mind, then I wouldn't have yielded and broken. In terms of the coming to Jesus more latterly, of like recognizing, oh no, you're a Christian, you're going to follow Jesus Christ. That happened because simultaneously, I mean, it's impossible to divorce it from these events. Simultaneously, in my country, after entering into, it seemed to me at least, a new space talking online about a lot of controversial subjects, whether that's the origins of war or the nature of the pandemic and the kind of claims that were being made during the pandemic and who benefited as a result of those claims, whether it was sort of global institutions, pharmaceutical, corporate, commercial institutions, or regulatory state institutions that suddenly were granted the ability to have this almost unfeasible and ridiculous power. I talked about that stuff a lot. I was starting to sort of move in a kind of different direction. I didn't sort of define myself as a kind of a populist, or as they say in this culture, kind of a red pill person, i.e. I believe in like the folks that flow forth from the belly of Joe Rogan, with all, you know, much as I love Joe Rogan. No, I felt like there's something else in here. And I've come to this as a drug addict in recovery. So when I get, and I'd also become disillusioned with fame a lot of times. You know, you get a lot of chances to become disillusioned with it. It's a pretty paltry offering, really. I think that when I see, say, Kanye West turn up with his nude and exemplary partner at the Grammys, I think, what is this citadel? What is this carnival in which you long took part? What are its values? What does it mean? What's it trying to tell us by its fruits? Shall we know it? I'd grown tired of that some time ago. I was living I'm married, I have 3 children, and I'm kind of understanding domesticity without really, if I can say, too much grounding in that area or too much appreciation experientially of what functional domesticity might be like. And trying to work out where I'm going to go in life. And then suddenly I'm deluged first with wave after wave of attack of you're a conspiracy theorist, then very sort of what seemed to me very particular, bespoke and constructed attacks based on historic sexual behavior. And what I must confess to is having created a lot of raw material when it came to my promiscuity and my consumption. Nevertheless, from this emerged untrue allegations of sexual impropriety, which forced me to recognize that the two things I'd been in practice worshipping, fame and sex, and I mean in practice because that's what I was spending my time doing, was trying to be famous and trying to have sex a bunch, that these two idols turned like serpents and became the vehicles of not my destruction, but the destruction of the previous identity and idol that I'd worshipped, Russell Brand, famous person. As if to sort of provide some ludicrous yet magical stone altar on which to place this offering. My beautiful son was born with a condition called tetralogy of Fallot, a diagnosis we received when my wife was 26 weeks into her pregnancy, and we were, of course, like all parents at that stage, offered termination. And this simultaneous shocks of learning that we were going to have a baby and that it was going to be challenging and going through that experience together, I mean, my wife Laura and I, while there was this external cacophony that seemed so dreadful and so awful because of the nature of the allegations, the truly awful nature of the allegations, because it was partnered with this vivid and real experience of Great Ormond Street Hospital, open heart surgery of a 12-week-old baby, the conversation where surgeons and anaesthetists tell you are aware of the risks. You are aware of the risks. My wife lactating after he's been handed over to the anaesthetist because, of course, like anyone before surgery, a 12-week-old baby can't eat for hours before the surgery. So vivid, so corporeal, so powerful that all of my systems, the systems I had, couldn't contain it or hold it. And in the midst of the sort of wreckage of it all and the bewilderment and the wilderness, in the wilderness of it all, the voices that I identify and locate are like people I know personally that are Christian, but that weren't particularly relevant somehow up until that point. And then some actual pretty prevalent Christians out of the culture emerge. And firstly, just with gentle compassion and openness, as they talk about Christ and salvation and redemption, it's not these intellectual propositions that win me over or convert me or change me, but a kind of inevitable and successive current of the truth of his grace that leads to me standing in the water of the River Thames with Bear Grylls, survival expert, and my mate Joe, who I walk the path of recovery with. Joe's known hard times and jail times, beautiful friend of mine. Either side of me, dipping me backwards into the Thames, the sort of coughing and choking that kind of preceded it. In the midst of the personal apocalypse and the white noise chaos that followed, there he is on the cross and above it, intimate and accessible, all-powerful, totally broken and vulnerable. Somehow transubstantiation is precisely what must take place, not in the Eucharist, but in the initial conversion. Somehow all of this is enough for me to say, oh, it's over, it is done, it is finished. And from then on in, a gentle cultivation and edification and, you know, reading the Bible. Like maybe I was a counterculture person. So I felt like I knew what was in the Bible without reading it. I felt like I get what it is. It's like sort of morals and do this and don't do that. I get it. And then like reading it, it's like, whoa, this is like, that's why I understand that people don't like to see anyone post-structurally applying Jung to it, for example, because they're the inference that it isn't absolute. And I know that you lot know so much more about how the composition and the canonization and the Council of Nicaea and all of that. But what smashed me right up was there's a force coming out of this that's simultaneously within me and not within me and is above me and is beyond me. And it all makes sense in the same way that like I talked to Jordan Peterson about this type of stuff a bunch, and he points out the nature of the Old Testament predictions and how unlikely it would be that all those predictions will be fulfilled, and Moses holds up the staff and the serpent and he's held up on all of these kind of sort of poetic and archetypal resonances and rhymes. But what came to me is like, oh my God, this is it. This is the source of my beingness. The thing that I've looked for in LSD and ecstasy, and I mean ecstasy in the sort of bodily sense, the cup runneth over, joy being fulfillment, ecstasy being the bursting of the banks of self, is all here somehow in him and in his blood. And I thought I was too clever for it. But it was too clever for me. And amidst all of that, there's his infinite grace and his infinite compassion sort of alloyed to that power. So it came from absolute brokenness. But more than that, it wasn't like sort of, although there's a desperate, save me, like I'm drowning, I'm going to die out here. There's also something much more powerful, like that when you grab hold of it, the transmission you receive is so sort of ferociously truthful that it annihilated everything that had come before it. All of the paganism, pantheism, individualism, solipsism, narcissism just flooded out like in a new deluge.
How recently was this, Russell?
April the 28th. I was baptized on April the 28th.
So it's all pretty new for you in terms of just like the flood, the deluge.
Yeah, it just happened so fast. It just created a new mental landscape. So much flows out of it. Oh, you can't change yourself. He's going to change you. Why are you trying to change yourself for? It's all going to just happen now. You don't achieve stuff through merit. It all just unfolded like a sort of a glossolalia of mad and incandescent facts poured forth from him relentlessly. The living water flows from the abdomen. The spirit is upon the water. Prima materia is consciousness itself. The pact between Satan and God when it comes to Job, the ongoing Luciferian presence of the false light of post-enlightenment, it all just arrived. It all just arrived like some mad new continent.
You know, one of the things that you talked about is towards the end there is about the grace that we have through Jesus that is poured out upon us. And this is something that I found interesting. One of the reasons why, you know, Wes and I really wanted to talk with you, Russell, is because some people hear your story, and that's one of the reasons why we actually wanted to tell people and get your story more out there. Is some people hear, oh, Russell Brand's now a Christian. And to them, they'll be like, well, I wonder how long that'll last, or I wonder if he's a real Christian, or is this just an act, or what's going on? And listen, I just want maybe some people here listening to this just need to appreciate, man, I celebrate when people come to faith and God's grace is extended out to them and they can accept that free gift in Christ, and that I'm not on some sort of timeline as a Christian. Like, okay, you're a Christian if you're a Christian for 5 days, for 5 months, for 5 years, like, do you know what I'm saying? In the sense that, yes, I want you to be a Christian the rest of your life, of course, but it's not like I wait until you're dead to go, oh, I guess Russell was a Christian.
Yeah, it's not a band. It's not like, I've liked Mumford and Son for ages. It's not that. This is beyond culture. This is the crucible of reality, not just another phenomena emerging from the crucible of culture. And I understand it because 90% of the things the culture gives you are not true. So it's just another cultural artifact on your same phone. You can watch people have sex with 1,000 people in a day. You can see a baby be born. You can watch someone getting their head cut off. You know, I don't know, like, how are you going to filter and aggregate all of that stuff? Like, it's just a bunch of information. And again, I'm not talking to anyone else. I know what he said. It's a proclamation. I'm calling sinners. I'm calling the broken. I'm talking to him. I'm talking to him right now. Like, and when I forget that, when I think, oh no, please, do I get a Christian badge now? Can you approve me? Then I remember, no, you're talking to him. You're talking to him. I'm not talking by his stripes. Right. I am saved. I am healed. I am whole by him. Do what you want. Now you can do what you want. Now you can do what you want because it's done. I'm like you said earlier, Wes, we're just on the precipice created by his sacrifice, waiting for whatever pursues in that abyss, which we believe to be the rapture and his returning, conceivable though that may be, in an enmeshment of the spiritual and the material, a final conclusion to this unknowable and apparently self-repelling paradox arrives only in him and in his sacrifice. Like, you know, like, I can't go and I'm not trying to be a Christian in someone else's head. I don't care what they do in there. That's between them and Jesus. I'm dealing with Christ.
When you go to church, Russell, this is one of the challenges of being famous. It's not like you're not famous anymore. You're still famous, and it has challenges. I'm sure it makes it difficult going to a store, but does it make it difficult going to church? And how do you handle that?
Well, the church I go to in Destin is a really beautiful church, and they're there for the same reason that I'm there. And because I'm a 12-step person, I've been in congregations of broken people for a very, very long time, and that's where I belong, is in that congregation. Fame is just an inadvertent consequence, first of other people making money out of me, and secondarily from my own set of attributes. And now going to church or going to a store or going anywhere or doing anything, it's not like I feel very welcome in the churches and church that I attend, and it's not been anything other than like beautiful, like, you know, what it's for, I guess.
That's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that, and glad to hear that you are a part of a church and that you are growing in your faith. I want to just take a moment, you know, as we're closing here. I want to just share something that's going on with Apologetics Canada. You know, we've had our own celebrity moment, if you will, with all the stuff that's been going on with Wes and all the attention that we've gathered through our social media and YouTube and all of that. And one of the things that we've heard, so many people that have reached out to us, they love that our tagline, Russell, is love God, love people. And we have these shirts that say love God, love people on them. So many people have reached out to us and said, hey, can I get one of those hoodies or T-shirts that say love God, love people? And we really haven't sold those things in the past, but we thought, you know what? We would love to just to give back for all that's been going on and how God has just blessed us over the years and continues to bless us, that we just want to give back. And so what we want to do is we're going to, for a limited time, we're going to sell these T-shirts and these hoodies. And you could buy those online. You could go to apologeticscanada.com and you could go there and check it out. And then we're going to give 100% of the proceeds away. There is a wonderful ministry that we had the privilege of filming with just a few months ago in Africa. We were in Malawi, the second poorest country in the world. And we had the privilege of telling the story of a young man named Moses. He's in his 20s. He comes from the Congo. He went on to get a degree in computer science and specializing in AI. He is a phenomenal computer coder, but what makes him truly beautiful and that I just love about Moses is his love for Jesus. And his love for Jesus has led to him giving his time and his money to the ministry and to helping people in Africa. And so on our website, you can go up there and you can actually see the story of Moses and what he's doing. And we want to give all of those proceeds to Moses and the work he's doing. In particular, he's working on this project called Well of Plenty. And what he's been doing in Malawi is in Malawi, they have 8 months of the year that are the dry season, and that's when people starve. So if you ever wonder, oh, I hear people are starving in Africa, what's that all about? Well, it's because they tend to starve during the dry season. They can't grow anything then, and they actually don't call it the dry season, they call it the hungry season. And so what Moses has been doing is he's been working with churches to teach people how to do drip line irrigation so that they can grow food for themselves and then they can actually sell it back to the market and provide for their family. It has been wildly successful. They have trained up thousands of people in Africa to do this. And that's what we want to send the money towards. And we just want to bless them and help them. So this is us just saying thank you for following us and just in being a part of this journey with us. And we want to bless others as we have been blessed. So we'd love for you to buy a T-shirt, love God, love people, and know that as you do, that you're actually participating in that great commission that we've all been called to, that we would all love God and to love people. And I got to tell you, Russell, it has been so good to have you on the podcast. And one thing I really do appreciate about you is you just have a genuine love for the Lord that just oozes out of you. And I just love that. And I see that love for the Lord and how it's working out through you in your love for people. And even, as we were talking about Christina here or others that are listening, I know that your desire is that they would come to bow their knee to Jesus and to accept that free gift of grace that God gives, that no matter where your story, the twists and turns that it has taken, that you can start again with him. I mean, this is what repentance means. It means to turn away from that old life, that life that's leading you away from God, and it's to turn back to him. And I would pray that, man, Russell's story would encourage you that Jesus is worth turning to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on the podcast. If people want to hear more from you and they would like to follow you, where would you send them?
I would say that my function is to preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten. So there is nothing for them to do.
But if they want to, if they're looking to find your content, say your podcast, Breaking Bread with Russell Brand.
Come on Rumble. That's where every day I'm there talking about the news, doing my best to hold back from continually exclaiming, surrender to Christ, whether I'm talking about Bobby Kennedy's confirmation or the latest cultural controversy. And then in my podcast, Break Bread with Russell Brand, I have brilliant and influential Christians like this week, Wes Huff, or recently Wes Huff. And I hope that in those conversations, what I try and do is I think, what is it you're trying to understand, Russell? And I really try to locate it in my mind, and I really try and see if I can pull it out and of the other person. And it's in the episode that we did, Wes, was so I was in receive mode. I learned a lot of things. And like to your point, you sort of talked around it a little, like, oh no, well, not oh no, oh wow. Suddenly there is attention and there is opportunity. What's this going to do? I know that in the church in this country, by this country I mean the United States of America, there's this sense that whenever there is sort of power granted, it's concomitant with testing, and the sort of celebrity pastor seems to be sort of the great exemplifier of this phenomena, tumbling almost inevitably into adultery from their pulpit. It seems, at least, that's a common pathway. And sort of speaking with, like, learning about this new world where churches are planted and raised up, where there's endless variations of church and denominations of church, is so fascinating to me. And it's also heartening to encounter Christians that are able to withstand what I hope is never devil's advocacy for why would we advocate for him, but it's certainly a kind of like, is this real? That's how I am when I'm in front of people that know more than me, and that's most of the time. Is this real? Is this real? Tell me. And I really felt that encounter between us, both of these encounters now with you too, Andy, have fulfilled me in that way and have helped me to locate where the challenges are. When he searches inside me, I can see where the challenges are.
Again, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for listening. This has been another episode of the Apologetics Canada Podcast. We'll come back next week with more things to think about. Until then, love God, love people. Bye for now.
It's the AC Podcast.